In the cold, oppressive woods that surrounded their isolated farm, the air felt charged with an ancient, malevolent force wrapping around Thomasin and her family like a shroud. The tension in their small home had become unbearable, each creak of the floorboards echoing with unspoken fears. Ever since their infant brother vanished into the darkened woods, an eerie silence had settled, suffocating any hope of normalcy. Whispers filled the night, chilling tales of witches that preyed upon the innocent, and Thomasin could feel the eyes of something unseen watching her every move. As she ventured deeper into the forest, the trees seemed to shift, twisting like the tortured souls of the damned, their gnarled branches clawing at the air. Every shadow held a secret, every rustle a warning, and the line between reality and nightmare began to blur as visions of a black goat and a figure cloaked in darkness haunted her steps. The atmosphere thickened with dread, the air heavy with the scent of decay, as she felt an insidious pull drawing her toward the heart of the woods. Her family's paranoia grew, and soon they turned on one another, fingers pointing in accusation, each convinced the others were in league with the malevolent force that had cursed them. Desperation turned to madness as their unity crumbled, leaving Thomasin to wrestle with her own burgeoning darkness. The whispers grew louder, seductive and insistent, promising power and freedom from the suffocating weight of their faith, as she stood on the precipice of a choice that could lead her down a path of unimaginable horror. As the moon rose high, casting a ghostly light over the clearing, she realized too late that the forest was not merely a backdrop to their tragedy but a living entity, hungry for a soul to claim, and the cost of her family's survival would be paid in blood. As Thomasin wandered deeper into the forest, the trees loomed like silent sentinels, their twisted forms casting long, eerie shadows that writhed in the moonlight. The whispers intensified, growing into a haunting chorus that wrapped around her, weaving promises and threats with equal fervor. She felt the weight of her family's despair pressing down on her, suffocating her spirit as the isolation gnawed at her mind. Each day brought fresh accusations, each member of her family a potential betrayer, driven mad by fear and hunger. Her father's once stalwart demeanor crumbled, replaced by a wild-eyed desperation, and her mother's soft cries turned into anguished howls that echoed through the night. In the darkness, Thomasin found herself haunted by visions, flashes of her brother's laughter, twisted into cries of torment. The black goat appeared in her dreams, its eyes glowing like embers, and its presence became a twisted comfort in her growing madness. It beckoned her, promising an escape from the suffocating chains of her Puritan upbringing, tempting her with a taste of forbidden freedom. The boundary between good and evil blurred, and in the stillness of the night she felt a flicker of dark power awakening within her, a seductive force that whispered of strength and autonomy. Desperation gnawed at the edges of her sanity, and with every passing day the forest seemed to respond to her turmoil, its breath hot against her skin. The air thickened with the scent of earth and decay, and she realized the forest was no mere backdrop, it was a living entity, a force that thrived on their fear and despair. In her family's madness, she glimpsed her own reflection, a dark mirror that offered both terror and exhilaration. One fateful night, after another bitter confrontation with her family, Thomasin ventured out alone, the moon casting silver beams through the dense foliage. Drawn by an unexplainable compulsion, she followed the path marked by gnarled roots and swirling mists, the whispers coalescing into a singular voice that promised liberation. As she reached a clearing, she found herself surrounded by a circle of ancient stones, each one pulsating with a dark energy that beckoned her closer. In that moment, she realized she stood at the crossroads of her destiny, a choice between a life shackled by fear and one free from the constraints of her upbringing. With trembling hands, she recited the words she had heard in her dreams, and the forest erupted into a cacophony of sound. The wind howled, leaves rustled violently, and the ground trembled beneath her feet as the black goat appeared before her, majestic and terrifying. It offered her a glimpse of the power she could wield, the darkness she could embrace, and she felt her heart race in response to its invitation. Yet a flicker of doubt danced at the edges of her consciousness, a reminder of the love and faith she had once held dear. As the moon hung heavy in the sky, Thomasin's world shifted irreparably. The whispers morphed into a chant, a dark celebration of her surrender, as the shadows around her thickened and twisted, forming shapes that loomed ominously. The choice she made that night would resonate through the very fabric of her being, marking her as both the victim and the vessel of an ancient, hungry power. In the end, she stood alone, surrounded by the echoes of her family's screams, fully aware that in seeking liberation, she had unwittingly sealed their fate, the forest rejoicing in the chaos she had unleashed. The air crackled with energy, and as dawn broke, the shadows faded, leaving only the stark reality of her choices, a new beginning forged in the blood of those she once loved. As dawn crept hesitantly through the trees, Thomasin felt a chilling silence settle over the forest, heavy with the weight of her actions. The vibrant colours of morning appeared muted, drained of life, as if the very world around her mourned the loss of innocence. The echoes of her family's screams haunted her, reverberating through her mind like a relentless drumbeat, reminding her of the irrevocable choice she had made. She stumbled through the underbrush, disoriented, the path twisting and turning as though the forest itself conspired to keep her ensnared in its dark embrace. Each step felt like a betrayal, the ground beneath her feet pulsing with a sinister energy that mirrored the tumult within her heart. The whispers that had once called to her now turned into mocking laughter, a chorus of derision that surrounded her, taunting her with the realization that she had traded one form of bondage for another. She was no longer merely a victim of her family's paranoia, she had become an instrument of the very darkness they had feared. The once familiar sounds of the forest, the rustling leaves, the chirping birds now felt ominous, each rustle a reminder of the lurking horrors that thrived on despair. In the days that followed, she attempted to rejoin her family, but the bond they had shared felt irrevocably shattered. Her father's gaze, once filled with love, now brimmed with suspicion and fear, as if he could see the darkness festering within her. Her mother, too, had become a shell of her former self, her sanity frayed by grief and the weight of guilt. The house, once a sanctuary, transformed into a cage of resentment and despair, its walls closing in around them as the oppressive presence of the forest seeped into their lives. The black goat became a constant spectre in her mind, its glowing eyes a reminder of the power she now possessed. It whispered promises of vengeance against those who had wronged her, inciting a storm of emotions that threatened to consume her. Night after night, she was drawn back to the clearing, compelled to embrace the dark magic that pulsed through her veins. Each ritual she performed felt intoxicating, a heady blend of power and fear, but with each act, she felt her humanity slip further away. The forest thrummed with a life of its own, responding to her desires and fears, feeding off the turmoil of her family. Her brother's absence became a gnawing void, a reminder of what she had sacrificed. The thought of his laughter twisted into a haunting echo, taunting her with visions of what could have been. Each night, she sought solace in the dark, but the more she immersed herself in the magic of the woods, the more fragmented her mind became. Visions of grotesque figures danced in her periphery, and the shadows took on shapes that writhed and twisted in the dim light, blurring the line between her nightmares and reality. Desperation morphed into a need for redemption, and she found herself spiraling into the depths of a dark pact, one that would bind her forever to the forest's insatiable hunger. One fateful evening, under a blood-red moon, she ventured deeper than ever before, drawn by an unseen force that promised liberation from her torment. As she stood before the ancient stones, she felt the air thicken with anticipation, the very fabric of the forest vibrating with energy. The whispers swelled into a cacophony of voices, urging her to embrace her fate. In that moment, she understood the true cost of her choice to sever the last ties to her humanity and fully accept the darkness that offered power but demanded sacrifice. The shadows coalesced around her, and she became the vessel through which the forest would reclaim its due. In the throes of this dark transformation, she glimpsed fleeting memories of her family, their faces twisted in horror as they realized the depths of her betrayal. Yet instead of sorrow, she felt a rush of exhilaration, a surge of dark magic flooding through her, igniting every nerve with raw power. As the moon reached its zenith, the ground trembled and the air crackled with energy. The forest responded to her call, unleashing a whirlwind of shadows that enveloped her, binding her to its eternal hunger. Thomasin stood at the precipice of her new reality, a dark queen in a realm of nightmares, fully aware that she had traded everything she once held dear for a power that would never truly satisfy her. And as the first light of dawn broke over the horizon, illuminating the desolation she had wrought, she felt the chilling truth settle within her. The forest had claimed her, body and soul, and the haunting laughter of the damned would echo through her heart for eternity. In the suffocating depths of the forest, Thomasin's mind unraveled, each thought twisting into a dark spiral of paranoia and despair. The shadows seemed to thicken, curling around her like tendrils of smoke, whispering secrets of a world steeped in malevolence. Every rustle of leaves felt like a warning, each snap of a twig a reminder of the ancient forces lurking just beyond her vision. Nightmares of her family's faces contorted in anguish haunted her sleep, their pleas echoing in her ears as the darkness wrapped tighter around her heart. The black goat, a sinister harbinger, began to appear more frequently, its glowing eyes reflecting her growing madness, urging her to embrace the dark magic that pulsed beneath the surface of her soul. The more she succumbed, the more her reality-warped visions of grotesque figures danced before her, and the trees whispered her name, each sound amplifying the dread that gnawed at her sanity. With every ritual she performed, she felt her humanity slip away, the forest transforming her into a vessel for its insatiable hunger, leaving her to grapple with the chilling knowledge that she was not only losing her family but her very essence to the shadows that thrived in the night. As she stood in the clearing, surrounded by the twisted forms of the trees, she realized with a sickening certainty that she was becoming the very witch her family had feared, a dark queen tethered to the malevolence of the woods, forever trapped in a cycle of horror from which there was no escape. In the suffocating darkness, time lost all meaning, stretching into an endless void where reality and nightmare fused. Thomasin wandered deeper into the woods, the weight of her family's fate pressing heavily upon her chest. Each step echoed with the ghosts of her past, her brother's laughter twisted into echoes of torment, and her parents' faces morphed into masks of betrayal. The forest, alive and breathing, seemed to conspire against her, each tree a sentinel bearing witness to her descent into madness. The black goat's presence was an ever-looming shadow, its guttural bleating mingling with the whispers of the wind, promising power in exchange for her very soul. As dusk fell, a palpable dread enveloped her, thickening the air until she could barely breathe. Flickering shadows danced at the edges of her vision, teasing her with glimpses of unholy rituals, ancient rites performed in the darkness by figures draped in tattered cloaks. With each passing night, the line between her desires and the forest's hunger blurred, her very being entwined with its malignant essence. Her fingers began to tremble with the energy coursing through her, a dark thrill that both exhilarated and terrified her. She sought the solace of the clearing, where she could feel the heartbeat of the earth resonating beneath her feet, a wicked pulse that matched her own. The trees seemed to lean closer, their gnarled branches reaching out as if to snatch her away from the fading remnants of her humanity. Desperate visions plagued her, images of her family consumed by the very darkness she had embraced. Guilt gnawed at her heart, but the forest's seductive pull was too strong, whispering promises of freedom from the chains of her past. With every incantation she felt herself slip further into the abyss, the warmth of her former life replaced by the cold embrace of the shadows. One fateful night, drawn by an insatiable need, she knelt before the ancient stones once more, their surfaces slick with moisture that glimmered like blood in the moonlight. The air crackled with a sinister energy, and she could sense the presence of unseen eyes watching, waiting for her to fully surrender. She closed her eyes, and in that moment, the forest erupted with a cacophony of voices, urging her to let go, to embrace the darkness that had become her reality. As she recited the forbidden words, a surge of power ignited within her, a blaze that threatened to consume everything she once was. In that moment of surrender, she became a conduit for the ancient evil that coursed through the woods. Shadows coiled around her like serpents, and she felt herself lifted beyond the confines of her own body, a vessel for the insatiable hunger of the forest. The screams of her family faded into the background, replaced by the triumphant roar of the darkness that had claimed her. As dawn approached, she stood in the clearing, transformed and unrecognizable, a dark queen of the night, forever entwined with the cursed woods, a harbinger of dread, destined to haunt the very souls she had once cherished. A harbinger of dread, destined to haunt the very souls she had once cherished. In the days that followed her transformation, the forest thrummed with a new intensity, resonating with Thomasin's dark power. She roamed the woods like a spectre, the whispers of ancient spirits guiding her steps. The air crackled with anticipation, as if the trees themselves held their breath, waiting for her next move. The once familiar trails twisted into labyrinths of shadow, each path leading her deeper into the heart of malevolence. Memories of her family, once vibrant and full of life, became blurred and distorted, their faces shifting in and out of her mind like phantoms. At night, she would stand at the edge of the clearing, where the moonlight pooled like liquid silver, and perform rituals that felt both intoxicating and terrifying. The power surged within her, urging her to call forth the spirits of the forest, to unleash the darkness that now coursed through her veins. With each incantation, she felt the presence of the black goat beside her, its eyes glimmering with an understanding that only deepened her descent into madness. The forest became her kingdom, a twisted realm where she reigned as both ruler and prisoner, caught in a cycle of hunger and despair. Isolation wrapped around her like a shroud, as she became a figure of legend among the local villagers, whispers of a witch in the woods spreading like wildfire, their fear fueling the darkness that surrounded her. Her heart, once filled with love and longing, now pulsed with the cold beat of the abyss. The trees seemed to call her name, their branches reaching out, beckoning her to embrace the full extent of her power. Yet in the quiet moments, when the wind sighed through the leaves, she felt a flicker of the humanity she had sacrificed, an echo of the girl who once dreamed of freedom rather than domination. As she danced in the moonlight, shadows swirling around her, Thomasin wrestled with the haunting spectres of her past. The laughter of her brother echoed in her mind, a painful reminder of the cost of her newfound existence. She was no longer the innocent girl who had wandered into the woods. She had become something else entirely, a creature of darkness, bound to the very forces that had once terrified her. And yet, amidst the chaos, a whisper of defiance flickered within her. Perhaps, even in her darkest moments, there lay a path to redemption, a chance to reclaim the fragments of her soul lost to the shadows. But as the trees swayed and the darkness deepened, she knew the price of that redemption would be steep, and the forest would not easily let her go. As the nights wore on, the forest seemed to pulse with an insatiable hunger, and Thomasin felt its pull deepening, entwining her thoughts and desires like creeping vines. The whispers grew louder, a cacophony of ancient voices that urged her to delve further into the darkness, to embrace the sinister power that thrummed just beneath her skin. She could feel the cold breath of the woods on her neck, a chilling reminder that she was not alone. Shadows danced at the periphery of her vision, and with each flicker of movement, she sensed the lurking presence of the souls that had been claimed by the forest, their cries echoing in the stillness, both warning and invitation. The rituals she performed became more frenzied, each incantation a desperate grasp at the fragments of her shattered identity. The black goat stood sentinel at her side, a silent witness to her transformation, its eyes gleaming with a dark knowing that sent shivers down her spine. In the throes of her magic, she glimpsed visions of her family, their faces twisted in agony as they realized the monster she had become. Guilt clawed at her insides, but the thrill of power eclipsed her remorse, seducing her deeper into the abyss. She was the forest's chosen vessel, a dark queen reigning over a realm of twisted desires and forgotten souls. Yet, amid this darkness, the flicker of her lost humanity refused to be extinguished. On particularly still nights, when the moon hung low and full, she would sit beneath the ancient trees and weep, the tears spilling onto the earth like offerings to the very spirits she had sought to control. She longed for the warmth of her family, the laughter that had once filled her heart, but each memory was laced with bitterness, tainted by the price she had paid for her power. The forest, once a place of refuge, had become a labyrinth of torment, each path leading her further from salvation. In her solitude, Thomasin felt the weight of the forest pressing in around her, a suffocating presence that stifled her spirit. The trees seemed to whisper her name, their branches reaching out like skeletal fingers, urging her to surrender completely. Desperation gnawed at her soul as she realized the truth: the forest thrived on her suffering, feeding off her despair and regret. With each passing day she became more entwined in its dark magic, a puppet dancing to the tune of a sinister force that cared nothing for her salvation. One night, drawn by a restless longing, she ventured deeper than ever before, to a part of the woods shrouded in thick fog, where the air was heavy with the scent of decay. Here the trees twisted grotesquely, their bark etched with symbols of long-forgotten rituals. As she knelt in the clearing, the black goat at her side, she felt an overwhelming urge to call forth the very essence of the forest. In that moment, she understood the cost of her desires to fully embrace the darkness meant sacrificing the last remnants of her humanity. With trembling lips, she whispered the forbidden words, and the ground shook beneath her, the shadows swirling into a tempest that threatened to consume her entirely. As the power surged through her, she realized with a chilling clarity that the forest would never let her go. She was bound to its malevolence, forever a part of its haunting tapestry, a dark queen in a realm of eternal night.